Thank you, Katie, and hi, everyone. Similar to what Katie said, thank you so much for coming to our session on going from nothing to something, how a team of two kickstarted an accessibility program. Sim and myself have a few house notes as well before we begin. There are images in this presentation, first and foremost. For more decorative images, we've integrated descriptions into our narration. And for key images, we'll comment with an explicit description. In addition, we want to take some time to make an Indigenous land acknowledgement in order to not perpetuate anti-indigeneity. You can learn more about the Indigenous land that you're on by going to https://native, that's NATIVE -land, land.ca/. In the before times, pre-COVID, Sim and myself worked on unceded Ramaytush and Ohlone land, and we are presenting today from Yakutsk, Kizh, and Tongva land. With that, I am honored and grateful to present the accessibility team at Splunk. Sim, do you want to kick us off?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Simerjeet Kaur. I usually go with Sim. My preferred pronouns are she and her. Speaker description. Today, I'm wearing an XCon-sponsored Digital Equality is My Jam blue colored t-shirt with a round golden frame glasses. Apart from that, I have a medium length brown hair. Behind me is a white painted wall. I'm working as a software engineer in accessibility at Splunk as a part, and part of my job is, but not limited to, performing manual accessibility testing for most of the Splunk product using different screen readers such as VoiceOver, NVDA, and JAWS, and automation testing using XScan and other automated scans available in the market, and followed by logging accessibility issues detected during the testing. I'm also responsible for creating a voluntary product accessibility template, commonly known as WPAT, which is then approved by legal and used by prospective and present customers to analyze our A11Y compliance standards. At other times, I'm also educating and advocating accessibility testing among Splunkers. I have been a Splunker for about 8.5 since August 2019, to be precise.
Thanks, Sim. Hi, everyone. My name is Alexis Lucio. I use she, her, they, them pronouns. Speaker description, I am wearing the same DQ shirt, Digital Equality is My Jam, in addition to a black hoodie that says .conf, which is Splunk's user conference. I've got long, dark hair that's slightly waved today with bangs, and I am also bespectacled, matching Sim. Behind me are white and blue walls with some hanging assorted pothos. I spend most of my day as the accessibility and inclusive design lead at Splunk, which means I am spending my hours going back and forth between providing general education and awareness on the importance of accessibility and how it can be beneficial to every team in the product development lifecycle. And in addition, pairing up with our engineering and design teams to ensure that we're taking both proactive and reactive measures to designing and developing A11Y best practices. As we said, we're part of a company called Splunk, which is the data to everything platform. What that means is that we provide a core suite of products that help software developers monitor, secure, and troubleshoot their developer environments. Now, you'd think that a company with a mission statement of making machine data accessible being the key word here, usable and valuable to everyone, means that our job as A11Y practitioners is easy. And as any accessibility practitioner knows, that's not the case. In fact, some days it feels like this stick figure in this illustration. The stick figure is in a defensive lunge, shield in one hand, sword in the other, and is fighting a 4-3-headed dragon because one of the dragon heads is slain on the floor. So in the remaining time that we have with you, we're going to share our learnings as we've developed this A11Y team, and also uncover topics that are not as common in blog posts or what you see on the internet, such as, what do you do when your team is below senior individual contributor level? What do you do when you're at an engineering-driven company as opposed to a design or user-driven? And lastly, what do you do when you're at a mid-sized B2B company as opposed to direct-to-consumer? We've divided our story into 5 acts. We'll first talk about in the beginning, which when Sim was by herself. We'll then go into when we became a team of two and how we provided education to build a network. In building that network, we had a moment of being careful what we wished for and this big opportunity that led us to the climax of our story, which is the boss battle. After that, we'll wrap up with how we became the victims of our own success and what we've been doing since then. And all of this was about a year long. I'm happy to say that our team just celebrated our 1 year anniversary last month. So let's get started with Act 1 in the beginning. Take it away, Sim.
Thank you. Act 1 in the beginning. In the beginning, as Alexis said, it was me. Now imagine being dropped into something which is everything and nothing at the same time, like a dot in the middle of nowhere and everywhere. When I picked this role, I was completely unaware and unfamiliar with Splunk and had never used the product. So not only I had to learn the product, but also had to map out accessibility for it. With no other team member as a part of this accessibility group at work, I had to get started somewhere, and I did what a QA can best do at this point. I started with what I had, and that was Jira and Confluence Access. So what I did, I started with reevaluation of existing test cases to scoping. That led me to scoping the testing for the whole product suite. It also provided me with the complete analysis report for accessibility for the product. And after reviewing this report, I decided that these test cases look great in terms of functional testing. But in terms of accessibility, they were missing the basics. Basics being such as VCAG success criteria. So I went ahead and started with implementing VCAG 2.1 success criteria into the test cases for all the future testing needs and purposes. So through Jira, I was also able to pull status reports for all the existing open Jira bugs that helped me analyze how most of these bugs were levels. So I thoroughly reviewed the severities for existing bugs and went ahead into assigning or changing severities as per the need. One advantage that I had was, and I still have it, by the way, it's my manager. He's an ally to accessibility and my biggest supporter at work. He helped me connect and collaborate with PMs, devs, designers, and other QAs to understand, educate, and analyze product accessibility needs. This not only helped me scope my work, but also helped me understand the product and the functionality. Lastly, I also decided to have a look at the available VPATs. Reviewing VPATs helped me understand the compliance level and also evaluate the changes or updates that needed to be made into the template, and also the future VPAT documentation. While I was working on all of these things, one fine day, I was working with this designer reviewing accessibility specifications for certain wireframes. He mentioned how design team is planning to onboard a Splunker for the full-time accessibility design role. And I can't tell you how excited I was to hear this news. I mean, I was reporting to the manager, I had a team, but that was not accessibility team. So finally having to be a part of sense of belonging of accessibility, I'm telling you, nothing can beat that feeling.
So in parallel to Sim's work, one sunny day in September, my head of design pulled me into a conference room. And after assuring me that I wasn't going to be fired, he posed the question, how would you like to think of diversity and inclusion beyond race, gender, and sexual orientation? He noted that he had seen my work in employee resource groups, or ERGs, and some public speaking opportunities I had done on diversity, equity, and inclusion. He said that I would be the perfect fit for an A11Y designer and had a mentor in mind at his prior company who could help get me to the stage that I am today. And also, you're listening, so hi, thank you. I responded to my head of design with hell yeah and began ramping up. Fast forward to February 2020, when our team of one became a team of two. Critical to us in individual contributor positions was how we could best advocate for accessibility and let a 6,000 person company know that these two people were here to support A11Y best practices and measures. We decided to take a dual approach. While we were each focusing on our own sphere of influence, mine design, Sim's QA, together we were working to establish a foundation. On the design side, I knew it was important to focus on educating myself as the so-called A11Y subject matter expert, and to pass this information to the rest of the company in a digestible format. I decided to start A11Y Hour, which was a monthly series on topics that were covering anything and everything in accessibility. At first, the topics were dictated by Sim and myself, and later on throughout the year, we found that there was traction and even crowdsourced replies, such as October's A11Y Hour, which was on vision disability and why color contrast is important, talking about CSUN, another accessibility conference, or our favorite, breaking down the rules of digital accessibility, particularly Section 508, which was May's topic for Global Accessibility Awareness Day 2020.
So while working on my day-to-day responsibilities, there was also responsibility to set up a process for this tiny but mighty team. As Alexis mentioned, while she was working on design systems, I needed to take the command on the engineering and the QA front. One of my main concerns was to prioritize customer audit issues. Since the day I started, one thing that has been consistent for me is the issues brought into our attention by customer accessibility audits. As most of us are aware, every organization performs an accessibility audit to analyze their product's compliance level. Splunk's customer also do the same. The audit was passed on to me via email through a sales engineer, and I was mostly lost trying to identify the pages and the screens and the issues. So this is when I realized that I needed to have a process. So we decided that we will request the steps to reproduce for all our in-house testing. And after filtering all the false positives and confirming the issues, we will file bugs. Now that we have done our due diligence, what's the next step? We can't just leave these issues into Jira backlog. So we needed to set a timeline to fix and merge these codes, which can be only done by the PMs and the devs. So there was this job of bringing education about why this was important and why we should do it in a timely fashion manner. Secondly, I was working with different teams as a subject matter expert, educating and briefing them to incorporate accessibility since day one. Now that we have accessibility design lead, I was advising teams to engage with Alexis in the initial stages so that we are not just waiting for me to test the code as the last resort. And then all of a sudden, when I'm done testing, we realize that, oh, we screwed up in terms of accessibility. So it was important that they start engaging with Alexis on their initial stages. Lastly, I started engaging with devs who were working on the front-end UI changes and feature development in the beta stages, and logging issues and advising devs to fix these 11Y defects before the code was merged into develop. This also gave me a room to breathe at the final stages of testing and less bugs to report. In short, a happy family. So while we both were doing our jobs, we were setting up a foundation or a process which never existed until now. We were benchmarking everything for ourselves and others at this point. But even now, we still had too many unanswered questions. For instance, how many accessibility tickets do we have? What is the rate of closing these tickets versus creation of these tickets? We both are performing our due diligence of testing in design and development, which means we're continuously logging issues while we're also working on closing tickets. So we needed to kind of come up with the ratio between these two, like creation of tickets versus the closing of tickets. Apart from that, we also needed to know where our products in terms of accessibility compliance stands. Splunk has nearly 10 core products and made 6 acquisitions in the past 2 years. But we don't know where we stand with accessibility compliance. I am working on one product at that point where I know how it looks, the next steps, and where we want it to be. And Alexis, on the other hand, is trying to work with few other teams to get an answer to our question. While finding answers to these questions, we also trying to figure out if there has been any accessibility work done in the past for our Splunk products. And if yes, who worked on it and how did this scope it? We knew the background for a few of the products, but there were still too many of them which we were not sure about. Simultaneously, we were also working with our sales engineer to identify what customers have we lost in the past because of accessibility compliance. So one of the huge benefit we had of getting these answers was that we were able to determine what % of our time to invest into a proactive approach versus the reactive approach. While we were trying to get answers to the questions, we were communicating with different teams, engaging with a lot of Splunkers, which was helping us build a network inside Splunk. And while doing this, we were making allies in our accessibility team for our organization. We both have accessibility connections outside Splunk. For instance, I talked to my former coworkers who also work as accessibility experts in their organizations to get answers when I'm kind of stuck or confused, or I'm not even sure what to do next, So all of this helped us not only build a network inside, but our company.
Yeah. And speaking of inside our network or inside our company and developing a network, one thing that was really unique to Splunk was our employee resource group, or ERGs. You may also hear this as a business resource group, BRG, or affinity group. While I was a co-lead for the Latinx employee resource group, I knew the co-leads for Disabled Equals True, our disability employee resource group. When I told both the leads that I was switching to an accessibility position at work, they were super excited. Now, fast forward to May and June, and in response to the murder of George Floyd, Splunk held listening sessions for every employee resource group, which had 2 executives on the call. Sim and I received an invitation to come to the Disabled Equals True listening session. We were also pleasantly surprised to see that they had in their list of demands headcount for more accessibility. And they gave us space for us to express our truth about the struggles that we were having from not only a people and culture perspective with regards to accessibility, but programs and operations as well. And one of the execs on the call was the Senior Vice President of Engineering, who post-listening session DM'd us and asked us to come into his leadership team meeting and present on the importance of accessibility, which took us a while to get over the initial shock. But afterwards, we knew that this was a perfect opportunity that we couldn't miss. It was go time, which leads us into Act 3, being careful for what you wish for. Over the course of the next 6 weeks, Sim and myself created this deck and started getting feedback from the trusted network internally of A11Y champions. We heard some great things and some not great things. And through that, we were able to learn a lot. Something that was really important to me was to tailor the business case of accessibility based on who we were talking to. As a designer, it's pretty easy for me to convince other designers that accessibility is the right thing to do ethically. It's for our users, it's the right thing to do. And the same thing for folks who are in the disabled community, who this is their day-to-day experience, or folks who may know folks in the disability community. And I have to admit, while that may be a better place to start than jumping into legalities, technical jargon, and guidelines, the ethical approach doesn't work for everyone. So we had to learn how to approach A11Y as something beneficial for legal. There's less chance of lawsuits. If we keep up with these existing regulations, we may have more opportunity or hours to work on something else. The right thing to do for engineering. There's less tech debt. You can set it and forget it if you take that proactive approach. We also met many engineers who had done the reactive approach and never wanted to do it again. From the sales and field side, there was a competitive advantage. Something particular to B2B companies is considering FAR, or Federal Acquisition Regulation, and knowing that being not only compliant, but accessible was this really key advantage to us winning deals as a company. For PMs, there's less questions from customers if we have documents prepared, such as RFPs, requests for proposals. And in marketing, a lot of accessibility contributes to SEO and finding more customers. And did you really want to leave out a large consumer group from leads? Probably not. In conjunction, our network of accessibility champions pushed us to do better with the examples that we were providing of what good accessibility was. Yes, we could highlight that companies like Apple, Google, Airbnb, and Salesforce are doing all these great things for accessibility. And some of these companies were not even in our space, let alone competitors. So we decided to look in our own backyard, metaphorically speaking, and find crystal clear examples of where we could level set to everyone in the room about the products and how compliant they were. For instance, Sim and myself found a public-facing COVID-19 dashboard that was being used in public universities. In addition, Sim said, hey, why don't we use JAWS and do a screen shade? Because we found that if we had a user interface exposed to sighted folks, they really wouldn't pay attention to what the screen reader was saying, but rather what they were seeing. By taking this user interface away, folks were forced to listen to the exact same experience that folks who were using a screen reader would have. And that's what we call empathy building in design. We also started to try and find customers who had these accessibility concerns, as Sim pointed out earlier, which led us to finding an SE that was able to give us numbers on how big some of these deals were to really solidify how important this effort was. Lastly, one of the pieces of feedback we got was we need to have a solution and we need to have a proposal of what we'd like to do and how we're going to get it done, such that leadership only had to say yes. Some of the questions that we were posed during our feedback sessions were, hey, you keep talking about government, but what sector of the government uses our product the most? What customers who require accessibility give the most return on investment? What are the most accessed pages from these customers? Or maybe what are the most common components on these pages? And how accessible are they? Give us this guidance of what to do next, and that'll make it easier for us to say yes and agree with you. Lastly, because nothing is ever an ideal path, the week before the presentation, I befriended Jihad, design director over at VMware and now chief design officer at Splunk. He sent me an article on making the case to decision makers, the presentation format to follow, and gave me some advice on convincing folks about the importance of accessibility. Given the not that great feedback Sim and I had received, with 48 business hours to go, we completely revised our presentation based on this article, which led us to that fateful day in August 31st, 2020 to be precise. And in a time slot slightly less than the time that we have with you today, we talked about the importance of accessibility, not only to our customers, but to our industry, to our market, to each other, and to the world. And I'm proud to say we got really great feedback. This is a quote from a distinguished engineer who was in the meeting. And he said, "Awesome presentation, like one of the best. I'm really glad you're both here and pushing us to do the right thing." And from our own advocate, that SVP of engineering who I met, he said, "I see a lot of content and reviews, and honestly, that was in the top 1% in terms of content, flow, clarity, balance of detail, and themes, delivery, and timing that I've seen recently." And he was just really excited for us and even invited us to come back 2 weeks later with our gap analysis and proposal of how we were going to make a program. So I, as I like to say it, did our presentation a little too well. And now we really had to think about how we wanted to transform A11Y into not just a checklist or a project, but a program. That leads us to our last act. This is a quote from our A11Y Docs champion, who told us we became the victims of our own success and what we've done since then.
All right, why we say we are victims of our own success. Until now, we were reaching out to teams, but it was different now. We were the center of attention. And trust me, we were really enjoying that attention. From us begging to work with teams, it was teams. It was not just one or the two teams, guys. I'm literally not talking about one or two teams. There were a bunch of them with requests and all of them needing and asking for the results right away, hence making us victims of our own success. Teams needed testing audits Teams needed testing audits on the available builds, Figma files, and other A11Y stuff, and on a very tight deadlines. We were overwhelmed with requests flooding out our DMs. And on top of that, we still have our day-to-day responsibilities that's part of our job description. This is when we realized that we need to build a process. I understand that I mentioned that we were building a process, benchmarking everything, but that was us getting started with accessibility process at Splunk. But now it was time for hands-on experience on design and testing. So we both, Alexis and I, we came up with this form where teams were supposed to fill the basic questionnaire. We didn't want to complicate it too much for them, so we kept it simple. The form provided us details about the team, the stakeholders, the timelines, the history of the product, which helped us, in return, scope our work, set timelines, and so on. This was also a way to collect the quantitative data where we look at numbers, trends over time to identify needs within our own organization. While we did this was great start, But we knew this wasn't going to be enough. So we had to open another line of communication, which was Slack at work.
So this is a screenshot of the public Slack channel that we have within our company's own Slack. We call it A11Y-questions. On this screenshot, we've got a designer asking about tips and best practices for accessibility for data visualizations, which is something that we're still working on. So if you have strong opinions, we would love to hear them. And in addition, someone reaching out from the engineering excellence team to say that they have a few hours worth of free resources that they can dedicate to A11Y. And we knew that this was important because we wanted to continue democratizing knowledge. Having 2 people for an entire product suite isn't exactly the most scalable thing, but we did find that a lot of folks were asking the same questions. And once we saw that there was a trend in questions, we could go ahead and pin the answer to those questions as part of an FAQ on the Slack channel. And as we continued growing, as we continued to build this deck and tell our story, we realized that our foundation that we had spent a lot of time and effort, blood, sweat, and tears, no blood, not actual blood, metaphorical blood, building, was turning into scaffolding. And we were building off of things that we created ourselves. For instance, our deck and the info that we got for it is being reflected in new employee engineering boot camps, such that every employee can come in with at least a bare minimum idea of what accessibility is and why it's important to Splunk. That gap analysis and proposal that we mentioned earlier reached all the way to the chief product officer's desk, which for a 2-person team at a 6,000-person company was a huge win for us. And maybe the biggest win was getting part-time resources from other Splunkers to do a weekly core accessibility team meeting.
So yeah, while we were building a team, the documentation was really important. So just to know that we're aligned and nothing is lost in the DMs. So we have a dedicated Confluence page for our core team. This page is a company-wide benchmarking of a product team. It includes work streams, point of contacts, and status of the accessibility. This page also progress and internally published RFPs, VPATs, and other documents. It also documents the declared OKR per quarter as a team and connects to the larger organization OKR. And I think I have to mention this. Our organization recently set a company-wide OKR for accessibility, which is a huge win for us. This page also collects stats around Jira tickets, so we can gauge remediation progress over time, what components to tackle first, and other needs, etc.
Yeah. And while Sim's working on this reactive Jira remediation approach, I'm taking a more proactive approach, particularly with engineers and architects, to include accessibility design from the get-go in Prisma, our new design system. This is a screenshot of an example storybook that we have. There's a button component on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, there's documentation about how to build an accessible button from the visual design, content, interaction, and development perspective. We even have a process around this now. I start with writing documentation for the components and sim test each of those components in context of the storybook and in product. And from there, we keep track of the deltas of where a component is at versus where we would like it to be and have change logs around this.
So I know we mentioned this. Until now, we had a reactive approach, but I guess it was time we needed to move on to the proactive approach, which is also called the shift left approach. For a while, I was performing testing for the products before the release, logging issues, which leaving a little to very no time for developers to fix issues before the product was released. But with Alexis joining the task force, we had a chance to do better. And this is when we started asking and advising teams to engage with Alexis on the initial and early stages to make a difference and a change.
Echoing what Sim said, it's not great to find all your accessibility challenges and concerns right before you release. So entering my position and me being farther up the product development lifecycle stream enable us to catch a lot of these bugs at the design phase and make sure that there was less for Sim to deal with later on. In addition, we're able to move even farther up the product development lifecycle stream and do things like engaging with customers and sales engineers and our field team in order to understand what are the maybe most pressing issues that we need to fix. Working with PMs to ensure that they build accessibility requirements as part of their PRDs, and also talking to engineers and seeing if there's enough time within sprints to fix some accessibility bugs, or maybe even do a bug bash around them. And one thing we'll say that was really crucial to us is really engaging with our sales field, sales engineers, and customers. As accessibility subject matter experts, if you will, it's easy for us to tell our colleagues that accessibility has to be done this way, or you should focus on accessibility. And a customer can say that exact same thing and has a very different tone. So not only are we saying these things, but our customers and our field and our sales reps are saying the same. And that unified voice can really help get things done. We're reaching the end of our presentation. We hope that if you have any takeaways, that they'll be this. First and foremost, A11Y is for our users, and it's advantageous to tailor the business case of accessibility to your stakeholder audience. In addition, dividing challenges into people and culture versus programs and operations can help identify pain points faster, can help determine how much you want to do a proactive versus reactive approach, and drive a strategy even if you're a little under-resourced.
Yeah, and also most efficient teamwork doesn't come from everyone trying to accomplish everything, but trusting expertise and leveraging our specialties. I can understand sometimes, while we're trying to achieve everything or we're trying to set a benchmark, it is really easy to get carried away and not realize how much we are capable of doing and not doing things. So it is very important for us to recognize when we are at capacity, when and how we can help each other, and when we need external help, which goes beyond our team. It is good to have a knowledge about everything, but it's important to put our trust into our teammates to get work done. All of this helps us to make a great and amazing teamwork. And we are all very much familiar with how teamwork makes the dream work.
And speaking of team, we do want to take a moment to say thank you to all of our mentors, past coworkers, leadership, folks who are not on this call but have contributed to the success of A11Y at Splunk, and just everyone who has believed in us. It really means a lot. And of course, last but not least, you all in the audience for listening to how we went from nothing to something at Splunk.
We would really like to open the communication to talk beyond this conference. So please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn, which is Sim Kesadu.
And you can reach out to me on Twitter at Alexis, X as in xylophone, Lucio.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. I think we have quite a bit of time for some Q&A, and we have a number of questions, great questions lined up in the queue. So Yay! If you don't mind, I'll go ahead and take us through some of these wonderful questions. All right, so one of the first ones that we've got a number of likes on is, what was the name of that article that you found useful in creating your pitch?
Yes, that is from Jihad Afonet. Let me go ahead and go back to that slide as well for sighted folks. It's on his blog. And then in addition, if you take a look at the slides, there's a URL or a hyperlink. So for folks who may need the slides to get there.
Perfect. Thank you for that. And as a reminder, the slides are available on this session's web page in the documents section. All right, let's see. There was a question about the accessibility audits you had talked about. This individual is wondering, is there a platform or specific test you are doing? Is it an AI program or an audit that's done by an individual or team?
It's more like manual accessibility testing that we do. And I'm just going to be a little specific here. I'm trying to figure out was this question around the audits that we do at work, or were the customer audits that reach out to us? Because in both ways, I can answer a little bit of both here. A customer audit is usually based on what a customer does on their product, which is our product initially. Our job here, especially mine, is to do manual accessibility testing. So I do use screen readers. I did mention that. I use voice, NVDA, and JAWS on different browsers to see where we stand in terms of accessibility. I do not just rely on the automation scans. They're a great start. I love them. I think it helps me to build or scope a page, but I still have to perform a manual accessibility testing. This is something that I can answer from the testing side when there's a build, but I'm pretty sure Alexis can pitch in about how things work on the design.
Yeah, thank you, Sim. We read our minds, each other's minds really well. So I also do design audits. The design team at Splunk use Figma. So oftentimes before build, I'll have designers reach out to me and say like, hey, can you look at this? Or I've built a new component. Can you look at it from the visual design perspective? Acknowledging that while a mock-up can't really go super deep into the implementation of like keyboard accessibility and all these things that are pretty dependent on a build, the things that I can catch are things like color contrast, making sure that you're using HTML semantics. Did you use hierarchy? If you are a tablet or mobile application, do you have both horizontal and vertical designs? Are you disabling pinch to zoom? Because we don't do that anymore. And also, I love being able to work a little more one-on-one with a designer because it's also a point of education. Explaining, hey, like, you could see this color contrast failure for a disabled component get picked up on your developer's automated testing. And I'm here to tell you that when we see it with a human eye, or we, look at the test and do a more manual approach, we know that we may not have to look at disabled components because, that's almost from a poor design experience. If something has too much contrast and is disabled, then that can create a false sense that it's active. And then on the flip side, I'll also go back to Sim and say like, hey, do we have that the cursor turns into disabled when someone's hovering over it? Are we making sure that the screen reader is not reading it because it's disabled? Or, do we say like it reads the element but says it's disabled? So I think being able to take testing in different aspects and adapting that testing depending on where you are in the product development lifecycle is key.
Great, thank you. So just kind of in summary, it sounds like when we're talking about accessibility audits, it's a number of things. It's planning for it in design, it's using automated testing tools, but it's also doing manual testing with assistive technologies such as a keyboard, screen readers, things like that. All of that is included when we talk about accessibility audits. Thank you. All right, let's see what else we have here. Can you talk more about the different ways you pitch why accessibility to different groups of people?
Ooh, I feel like that's a me question. What do you think, Sim?
This is both of us questions, so why don't you start and then we'll
I'll talk from the design and PM, and then I'll let Sim talk from the engineering perspective. Again, letting us trust our areas of expertise and working together. And so for design, like I do say often, like, hey, it's the right thing to do. Like 1 in 5 Americans has a disability. Are you going to tell me that no, person later in life is going to use our product? And I think even pulling examples of places where I'm like, hey, like I have astigmatism, but like this color, I can't even read the color contrast on this. Can we help bump it up a little bit? And, showing designers that, because this is a contentious topic, but I do believe a lot of traditional design education is rooted in ableism, and not every designer, if not majority of designers, don't have education around accessibility or awareness. So for me, it's also a learning opportunity to unlearn unlearn these design patterns that are truly inaccessible, and no one's ever, stopped to say like, hey, maybe we shouldn't use like the lightest gray font on this white background, and just like truly getting someone to just think in a different way. And I think that's our responsibility as designers, to be not only empathetic to a user, but users who come from all walks of life and all abilities and all ranges of, motion and cognitive ability. From the PM side, something that I like to talk about is the regulations. So I'm sure A11Y practitioners are very familiar with AODA. That's Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. That's one of the most, I would say, strict guidelines for digital accessibility in 2021. And if your company does business with Canada, that's a really good leverage because technically AODA now has a stronger guideline than Section 508 in the US. So do you want to spend time trying to like finagle things with PMs instead of saying like, hey, this is the baseline that we should go for. The advantage of you doing this now is that we're not scrambling 1 year from now trying to be like, oh, we have to do these 17 guidelines and this particular customer needs mobile and we haven't thought about mobile. So that's where I kind of leverage using a lot of guidelines. Again, just checking where your customer base is, because chances are every major sales district in the world has an accessibility guideline. And again, it's about providing that knowledge, because I think oftentimes, like when I was doing my research, I didn't know that like the United Nations has like a accessibility guideline, and like there's a pact with like 180 countries who are involved in it. So oftentimes it's just, doing the work and being able to line it up to a goal that that department has, or putting it in a way where they understand, because you understand what makes them successful.
I think Alexis mentioned it really well, why this is important from all the different sides, but not. And I'm just going to focus on the engineering here. And something to add to Alexis is anytime somebody comes up to you, oh, why should we do it? I always tell them it's a good publicity. Do it. You should do it. That's just one random thing I tell people. It's a good publicity. Just you need that. You need that publicity, no matter what. So something that I do from accessibility point of view to my devs or engineers is when they say this is not important, I always go ahead and turn their screen off, and I'm like, yeah, go ahead, navigate through this and tell me how you feel about it. What do you think about this? How is it now? You didn't really feel this was important. Now I'm asking you to navigate with it, or at least listen. Or I always share these videos with them where I do a screen share and I don't let them see the screen. It's like, I want you to feel how it feels at this point. If I tell you to navigate through this, would you really enjoy this? I mean, yes, there are times when you can navigate, but is it a great experience? Because it's like about creating the best experience for everybody out there. It's just not me. It's just not one person. It's not catered to 2-person or 3-person. It's just catered to everybody. So we have to make sure we're giving everyone just a wonderful experience, no matter how they're using the product. So that's one thing that I do. And I know my developers hate that sometimes, but yes, they love me. Everybody else will love me for that, but I'm okay with it. I've done in the past at my previous jobs, and I still do it at Splunk. And this really works from engineering side, just do that. Always tell them to navigate with their eyes closed if nothing else is working.
Yeah, putting them in somebody. Oh, sorry, Alexis, go ahead.
You're good. Really quick one. I think myth that there is in the A11Y community is that assistive technology is super expensive and it costs thousands of dollars, and you need all these licenses and like 6 hours of training. Your keyboard is a piece of assistive technology. Your mouse that comes with your laptop. Mac has voiceover that anyone can turn on. Windows has NVDA. Windows has a high contrast mode. So oftentimes, if a designer that I'm working with is like, I don't know anything about accessibility, I tell them, go navigate your build using only your keyboard. And I recently had a conversation with a designer about that. And he came back to me with a 3-page audit. And I was like, okay, first of all, thank you, because that saves a lot of work on me. And I was able to go in and, kind of say the false positives that we might find in automatic testing, for instance, or saying like, hey, like this is a really good point, but in the context with a little more, SME perspective, we don't have to like consider this because, there's this workaround.
Yeah.
So again, it's getting people to do it and just, playing around with screen readers and keyboard and mouse. And when we were in office having things like accessibility labs or empathy labs, I'm really curious to see how that experience is going to transition into the future of work. I know that things are not going to go back to the way they were. So a question for A11Y practitioners in our community is how do we build these tools that would bring empathy, and that's open-ended, so something to noodle on.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. All right, the next couple of questions we have here are related to your accessibility program. One individual is wondering if it also includes governance or gatekeeping of inaccessible products or enhancements being released. If not, who plays that role in your organization?
I think it comes back to the phase of testing. We have to perform anything for any cloud or on-prem releases that we do for our product. We have to perform accessibility testing, especially for the front-end changes or feature development that's happening on the UI. So what that does is, because once I do the testing, I have to create a VPAT, and I think I did mention that in the initial stages of our presentation, that a VPAT is a voluntary product template, accessibility template, which keeps track of how our accessibility, where we stand in terms of our standards of accessibility compliance. And that is approved by our legal team here at Splunk. So it just becomes a process of governance because they have to. We cannot have the same VPAT being issued 4 times and same issues are there what I had in the previous first VPAT. You can't carry forward those issues. At some point you have to fix them, you have to close them, so that your fresh VPAT just includes the standards or the compliance level at that point. So this is how we keep track of it. And we're still working, so you have to understand, every day, Alexis and I, we both are still trying to form a process. There is a process, but we're enhancing our own. We learn from our own mistakes. Sometimes we do things in a way we are like, oh, we shouldn't have done that. So we have to enhance that process, make changes, updates, however that goes.
And I think something that's been really important, and this is work that Sim has done that's made my life a lot easier, is working with in particular engineering teams to have a list of severity versus priority, and what are some examples of accessibility bugs that fit blocker, critical, major, etc. Because that goes back to twofold. One is someone who doesn't have as much awareness as, say, Sim and myself in accessibility may have a very different opinion of how critical or severe this remediation is. And part of governance is ties back to what we were talking about, building a network, right? Like, we have people who are not dedicated full-time accessibility folks, and they can stand they can engage in those rooms and those conversations that we're not in, and say like, hey, like, I know that's not gonna fly. Like, we need to fix this. Or if, and they're the kind of people who have more leverage than we do as non-senior individual contributors.
Yep.
Wonderful. All right, we've got just 2 minutes left, so I think we'll probably round out with one final question here for today's session. So this question is about accessibility team members that have split roles within an organization. So maybe they're playing part-time designer, part-time accessibility specialist, or evangelist. Do you have any advice for convincing upper management to form a dedicated accessibility team?
Wow, y'all have great questions today.
I know, right?
I think it does start with educating about accessibility. Like, do some homework and figure out, who are you selling to? Like, we know that if you have any customers in the public sector, in universities, in healthcare, in financials, you should have accessibility, period. Because your customer can get sued for something that you did, and it's going to go downstream and back to you. And to Sim's point, everyone wants good publicity and no one would like bad publicity. And lawsuits are like #1 bad publicity. I would say, like, it starts with convincing management, and like, start small. Like, you can't boil the ocean, metaphorically speaking. And I think at times, putting something that's within your scope, and you don't have to have a program overnight. And, this is part of what I talked to Sim about, of like recognizing when we have to let things go just because we don't have the resources. You know, I want to acknowledge we are still in a pandemic. There's still a lot of capital S stuff that's going around, and it's acknowledging that we do our best when we show up for ourselves. Make sure that, you know, we're not working 18-hour days because we want to convince someone next week, right? So it's, you know, if you're, say, a designer, I'm going to use that as mine, you know, be confident in explaining to your own design team and start gaining momentum that way. Building that network is super important. And then if you're in a position like some of myself where you're not a senior level person, start talking to senior level folks who can go up to bat for you, who understand how to do resourcing. Because, you know, at some point you're like, I actually don't know how to do that and I need some help. Employee resource groups are also a really great thing to leverage. I want to add a disclaimer that I firmly believe that disabled people don't have to educate able-bodied folks about accessibility, and we need to listen to members of the disabled community. And, you know, if they give you the consent that they want to help you, that they have these resources, that can be a really good way of going through, say, like a DEI HR approach versus, you know, in my own position, like I report to our products and technology organization. So that way you're having multiple voices, and it gets to that point where someone's like, oh, maybe we should hire a full-time accessibility SME.
And sometimes it's really helpful. Yeah. Sometimes it's really helpful to evaluate where you stand in terms of accessibility, existing Jira bugs also. Know how many bugs you have. You can always convince people that it takes longer time to fix these issues and how expensive those are. It's cheaper to engage in the initial stages. And I think I was listening to Dave Rupert speaking earlier, and he mentioned the same thing about how fixing bugs is way expensive than actually getting started on the initial stages. So I'm just going to enforce that again here, that it's very important to convince, because they like numbers. Yeah, just take this bunch of numbers and explain them why you're saying what you were saying.
Yep, develop that ROI for the cost of accessibility. Yep.
Perfect.
Well, great. Thank you so much for this excellent session, Sim and Alexis. And thank you all for attending. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of AxeCon. Bye, everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Take care.
Take care, everyone. Thank you.